This is The Journey, podcast edition. If what you're building didn't come with a playbook, you're in the right place.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Journey, your builder's field manual. I'm Paul, and today we're diving into a topic that can make even the most confident entrepreneurs break out in a cold sweat. Like, this one has made me dew at the brow more than once. Sales forecasting. If you've ever been tasked with predicting how many units you'll sell next month, next quarter, or next year, you already know it's not exactly a walk in the park. In fact, it's often as nerve-wracking as public speaking. The first few times you do it, your palms sweat, your brain feels like it's playing kind of mental twister, and you start thinking, yeah, how am I supposed to know what's going to happen in the future? Here's the thing, that feeling is normal. And the good news is that just like public speaking, forecasting gets easier the more you do it. You start to recognize patterns. You see where your past estimates went wrong, and you learn to adjust your process, your model, and improve the next time around. But first, let's break forecasting down into what it actually is and what it entails. So, what does forecasting really mean? At its very simplest, forecasting is making an educated bet on how many things your customers are going to buy in the future. That's it. You're estimating demand so that you can plan ahead. If you make your own products, you use that forecast to order raw materials, schedule production, maybe even line up packaging and shipping. If you use a contract manufacturer, sometimes called a co-packer if you're in food products, CPG, that kind of thing, you'll often give them your forecast for finished goods so they can plan their production slots, and that applies to both contract manufacturers and co-packers. See, the thing is, forecasting is hard. Even giant corporations with decades of experience, sophisticated software, and teams of analysts, they get it wrong too. That's one of the main reasons why companies like Winners, Marshalls, and Liquidation World even exist. They buy up excess inventory when those forecasts go off the rails, and there's enough of that happens that they have sustainable businesses, right? Here's why forecasting matters so much. When you get forecasting wrong, you can end up in one of two kind of uncomfortable places. You run out of stock, which means lost sales, disappointed customers, potential damage to your brand. You're leaving money on the table. You have too much stock is the other one. And this ties up cash that you could have used for other things like marketing, product development, or even paying yourself, right? Some business owners will tell you it's better to under-forecast to protect cash flow. Others will say it's better to over-forecast so you never miss out on sales, on revenue. Personally, I think both of those are really just distractions from the real goal. Your real goal is to have a rational, data-informed process that you can refine over time, and to build in guardrails so that even if you get it wrong, it doesn't sink your business. There are three main approaches to forecasting. And when I talk about forecasting, it kind of falls into one of these three categories, the type of forecasting you're doing. There's causal modeling, which is looking at really cause and effect kind of stuff. For example, the economy's in recession, or we're about to run a big sale, or our competitor just shut down a major store near our store. Another one is qualitative modeling. So using research and expert input to kind of shape your forecast. Could be customer surveys, focus groups, data on brand loyalty, could be market research. It's kind of like big picture stuff most of the time with qualitative modeling. The other one that we're really going to focus on today is time series modeling. So you're using your own past sales data to predict future sales. And the folks at IBM, they love to get fancy with the words, even more than I do. And they call all of this kind of demand side forecasting predictive forecasting, or predictive demand side forecasting, which is just really a fancy way of saying, I'm going to look at what happened yesterday and guess about what's going to happen tomorrow. If you're an early stage company making tangible products, time series modeling is a great starting point. It's accessible, it's practical, and you can do it with nothing more than a spreadsheet and your sales history. So here are 4 time series models that you can try out pretty easily. Let's walk through them one by one. The first is the historical comparison. This is the simplest, most straightforward method. Look at a past period, say January of last year, and assume you're going to sell the same amount in January of this year. 228 widgets last January, 228 this January. Super simple. Now, it's not perfect, and I'm sure you can guess why. It doesn't account for growth, promotions, or any shifts in consumer behavior or your market, your customer audience, whoever you're trying to sell to. But it's a foundation, and all of the other models that we'll talk about here build on the historical comparison. So next, let's talk about moving averages. The moving average is really a method that you apply on top of the historical comparison to smooth out some of the highs and lows over the course of a longer time period and give you a clearer sense of a demand trend or a sales trend. Here's how you do it. You take your sales data for the last 12 months, you group it into your chosen time period. Months is really common. That's how I kind of go about it most of the time. But other periods are okay if that's more appropriate for your business. Then you calculate the average of the last 3 periods of sales, and you use that number as your forecast for those 3 periods. So what you're really doing is you're swapping out a given period with the average of 3 periods. By averaging together multiple months, you reduce the impact of unusual spikes or dips, like that time, you got a huge PR mention on a podcast like this one. Or on the flip side, you had a supply chain hiccup and you were out of stock for a little bit. Okay, seasonally adjusted moving average, or SAMA, is the next model. Now, we're going to add in another kind of layer here, seasonality. Many businesses see predictable swings in demand throughout the year. Think like holiday shopping surges, summer slowdowns, back to school spikes. SAMA adjusts your moving average to account for those patterns. And importantly, if you're looking at year-over-year comparisons and building these forecasts, your previous period, like same time last year, will probably already factor in seasonality. So if you're doing year-over-year, you don't have to worry about seasonality too much. It is something to keep an eye on, though. Where seasonality adjusted moving averages get really useful is if your look-back period is less than a year. So if you are building a forecast for, say, August of 2025, by looking at your sales data from July of 2025, but you have a factory shutdown, or like you have a closure or something where sales are going to go down, and that's natural in August, then you want to kind of factor that into your forecast. So to do this, first you want to identify those seasonal patterns in your sales data and your history and say, okay, at what times of the year are things going to go up or down because of something I know about? Then you'll calculate your moving average, just like you did with the last model, and you'll apply a seasonality factor to increase or decrease your forecast for those predictable peaks and valleys. And you calculate your seasonality factor just by looking at the difference, the delta, between the current period, which is seasonal, and the last period, which is non-seasonal. So if, for instance, in July of 2025, you sold 100 things, and in August of 2025, you only sold 50 things because of a known closure or something in your sales channels, then you would take 0.5, because it's cutting in half, and you would apply that to your forecast for the August period that you're working on. That's kind of how it works. This is pretty helpful if you sell consumer goods or anything with really predictable buying cycles tied to things that happen in your customer base that you know about ahead of time. Now, these models, like just talking about them out loud, it's a little bit goofy. I would struggle to wrap my brain around this. So if you go into the show notes after this episode, And check out the link to the companion post. In that post, I dropped a bunch of different spreadsheet examples for these models. So you can kind of like read through the post, you can go to the templates, and feel free to download them if you want. And you can fiddle about with them to really kind of like wrap your brain around all this forecasting stuff that I'm trying to squeeze into 15 minutes while you're, on your commute to the office or going for a run or whatever. Here's the last model that we're going to talk about today. I call this exponentially smooth bursting. It's one that I developed, and it's this model is kind of a Frankenstein of a moving average with a statistical modeling method called exponential smoothing. And really, I developed it to try and model the unpredictable nature of a new product launch where you don't have any historical data because the product is new, right? Even though I designed this for new product launches, it can also help if your business is really focused on creating demand through like intensive short-term bursts of activity, major promotions, PR spots, or if you are putting like a lot of effort into a social media marketing campaign with an influencer that's going to generate some virality. You can use this model to kind of predict demand around those little like spikes. So to do this, what you do is you look back at similar bursts in the past. So, let's say you got on a podcast or you got on like an influencer show or something last year and it absolutely blew up. So this year, you look for a different influencer that's kind of similar. You want to replicate that tactic, looking for it to blow up again. So you mark down that date. Then you measure the lift in sales in the periods leading up to that date, kind of on that date, and then after that date. You want to get a sense of what the demand was like just before, during, and after that kind of like burst period. Then you'll create a demand curve showing how those sales spiked and then tapered off, and that's important too. And you'll take that model and kind of apply it to your future planning. Now, to measure the deltas between the different periods around your burst, all that you're really doing is you're looking at your sales during the burst period, your unit sales. And unit sales is important. Like, we're not talking about dollars. Dollars, we don't really care for the purposes of doing a sales forecast that has like production planning in mind, which is really what we're talking about today. So you look at your unit sales during that burst period. You look at your unit sales before the burst period and then after the burst period, and you calculate the delta like some of the other methods we've talked about. So let's say you have a campaign that drops and it's huge. Like August 10th was when the campaign dropped, and you sold 1,000 things. In the week leading up, you were averaging, like maybe 100 things, sort of. The week after, maybe it was like 500 things. The week after that, maybe it was 200 things. So you're going to look at a demand curve that's like, okay, a week out, negative 50% from the burst. 2 weeks out, negative 75% from the burst, et cetera, et cetera. So then you can take that number, 1,000 units, and say, okay, during the burst, it'll be 1,000 units. The week after the burst, it'll be 500 units. The week after that, it'll be 250 units. And if you think that this burst is going to be different, if it's going to be 5,000, say, or 10,000, or maybe 2,000, you use those deltas to adjust accordingly. So with this method, you still need to figure out what you think you're going to sell on the burst period when things are kind of like hot. You have to figure that out outside of this model. But then you can use this model to really capture and map out that demand curve. And that's quite valuable for forecasting. What you've noticed, I'm sure, about these different models is they require historical data, right? And that's because, time series modeling, this type of modeling, it really seeks to create certainty in what's going to happen in the future by looking at the certainty of what has already happened in the past. So what do you do if you don't have historical data to work with? This can happen if you're brand new or you're launching a product that is unlike anything you've sold before. It's completely like greenfield. Without past data, time series models, like they just don't work, right? If you throw in guesses in a time series model, like you're really just guessing after running the model, which takes time. So why wouldn't you just guess to start with? Is kind of like the weakness of doing a time series model without historical data. But here's what you can do instead. If you really don't have historical data, then you can forecast based on your tolerance for financial risk. So ask yourself, how much capital can I commit to production without jeopardizing my ability to do this again if it flops? How confident am I in my product market fit? Have I nailed it? Or is this a little bit of a risk? Is this iffy? And if I had to discount heavily to move product, could I fund a second production run? If something went wrong, could I do it over again? In other words, work backwards using your tolerance for risk. So if you've got $10,000 in operating capital and you want to keep $5,000 in reserve because that'll let you do this all over again, you produce as many units as you can with that other $5,000. Launch, measure, adapt, repeat. You can go at it that way if you've really got no data to work with. Now, there's another issue that we should talk about. Tracking your forecast accuracy. And for me, this is kind of like a non-negotiable. The step that most businesses skip is really taking a look at how accurate their forecasting was, how close to the market was, and thinking about why it was good or not good, and thinking about how to improve. If you don't track your accuracy on forecasting, you can't improve. And forecasting is a skill that needs continuous improvement. Like, they say that economics is the dismal science, so is forecasting. Like, this is much more of an art than it is a science, even though it's based on scientific methods and scientific things. It is still quite a bit of an art form. So you got to work on it. You want to make this a habit. Compare your forecast to your actual sales. See where you overestimated, where you underestimated, and ask why. Adjust your model, adjust your process. Over time, small tweaks like this, they compound into a forecasting process that you can trust. It gives you confidence to invest in growth and take risks. Some final thoughts. Forecasting is not about being perfect. It's about being prepared. It's about giving yourself enough visibility to plan production, manage cash flow, and avoid the chaos of constant stockouts or overstock, because those are super disruptive to your operations, and they will give your accountant or CFO like gray hair super prematurely. Here's my challenge for you. Pick one of those models, apply it to your sales data, see what happens. Track your results. Refine your approach. And before long, sales forecasting won't feel like the dismal science at all. It'll feel like one of your builder's superpowers that you can pull out of your back pocket when you need it. So that's it for this episode. Go check out the show notes. Like I mentioned, you're going to find a link to the companion post there. And in that companion post, there are links to example spreadsheets for each of the models. Download them, tinker around with them, do whatever you like so that you can kind of wrap your brain around this stuff, because it is super useful. You get good at forecasting. You get good at running your business. It's one of those like core things of running a really smoothly operating business.
And that's it for this episode of The Journey Podcast Edition. If you're building something from scratch or scaling something messy, make sure to follow, share, or just send this to someone else in the trenches. Until next time, keep climbing.